Thursday night, guys. No Met game on the schedule, so you know that what that means. It means another episode of Down on the Corner. Tonight, we are joined by a true baseball lifer, all-star outfielder, World Series champ, Clemente Award winner, one of the smoothest voices in the booth. He broke in with the Mets, became a star in Montreal and Baltimore, then spent 25 years. Yeah, we'll give him credit for this as a Yankee broadcaster, calling games with insight, humor, and that trademark. This one is gone. From Mount Vernon to the majors to the mic, please welcome the great Ken Singleton to Down on the Corner. Kenny, I have to tell you, it's an honor to have you with us. We're excited to start talking about your journey, but I have to tell you, growing up, Little League, my first number was 29 as a 10-year-old. And it was actually my high school number as well when I played high school baseball, even though you were already gone. So it's a huge thrill for me. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's my pleasure. And 29, I played for three different teams, but 29 was the only number I ever had. And I'm proud to say it's been passed along. My middle son, Justin, is the high school baseball coach in Haddonfield High School, and they're one of the top 20 teams in New Jersey right now. And he wears number 29 on his jersey, too.
Awesome. Before we open it up to the Zoom room, I'm going to get the questioning started. Guys in the Zoom room, as always, you know the rules. Keep yourself muted till the end, and don't make facial expressions when I steal your questions. I'll try not to steal all your questions, but Ken, as you may know, this show is inspired by the legendary Ralph Kiner, his iconic post-game show, Kiner's Corner. I know that you did appear on Kiner's Corner. Not only that, Ralph was a hitting instructor in the instructional league
Yeah.
when you were down there. So could you share a little bit about being on Kiner's Corner and also just working with the legendary Ralph Kiner?
Well, first of all, being on Kiner's Corner, and as most of you know, I grew up in the New York area. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. So, and I was kind of a Mets fan, although early on they were kind of hard to root for because they didn't win very often. Then I kind of liked the San Francisco Giants because they had Willie Mays on their team. He was my favorite player of all time, which kind of makes sense. He's one of the best players ever, if not the best. So anyway, uh, watching Kiner's Corner all those years with the original Mets. I mean, when they lost 120 games, but somebody's going to show up on that show every once in a while. Players like Jay Hook or Hobie Landreth or Gil Hodges or Choo Choo Coleman or Ed Charles or somebody would show up on the show. And these are the guys that I watched after the Mets game, whether they won or lost. Ralph would have somebody on. And eventually, I made it to the major leagues, got on and got on the show. And it was sort of like a surreal experience because I was imagining in my mind, all the show that my friends and I used to watch when we were teenagers and younger than that, all of a sudden now I'm on the show and they're watching me. So it was very special to say the least. Ralph was also a great hitting instructor, helped me out greatly. The Mets actually sent him down to instructional league to help me out one winter, and I can call him sit next to him. I'd sit next to him on the bench, and I went up and hit a home run. I came back and I sat down next to him. He says, "Well, you can't do much better than that." And so yeah, he had a sense of humor, and it was first of all, he's one of the greatest home run hitters ever. I think he led the league in home runs like 7 or 8 years in a row. Yeah, so. Just to sit down next to him and just this guy who I've been watching on TV all these years, and he's helped me out and helped me early in my career become a major league player that in a career that lasted 15 years.
So you mentioned you're from Mount Vernon, born,
Yeah,
there. You played stickball in Mount Vernon, but you
yeah.
also mentioned that you idolized Willie Mays. What were your earliest baseball memories from the streets playing stickball, and how did that shape you as a type of hitter and a person you became?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that we played in the Graham School playground in Mount Vernon, New York. My buddies Joey Williams and Arnie Moskowitz and Steve Goldberger, we would play in the playgrounds. And of course, you pitch. My favorite team, as I said, was the Giants. So that's how I became kind of a switch hitter because whenever Willie Mays would hit, I'd hit right-handed. Whenever McCovey would hit, I'd hit left-handed. Cepeda and all up and down the lineup. It's just most of my friends were Dodger fans, a few Yankee fans involved, and and we at that time, like, as I mentioned, the Mets weren't very good, so they were kind of the team we watched on TV and hoped they would win. If you understand what I would mean. So yeah, that's how I became a switch hitter, hitting the playgrounds. Graham School playground was unusual because the fences were kind of locked. So if you hit a ball over the fence, you had to climb over the fence to go get the ball. And also across the street, if you hit it up on the storefronts, you had to go through an apartment building, climb out on the roof, and then go get the ball. Now, the hitter didn't do it. The pitcher had to do it. The guy who threw the ball had to go get it. Now, fortunately for me, I didn't give up many home runs to my buddies, but it was uh, they they're lifelong friends. Some of them have passed away, but my best friend is still around, and we talk quite often, all sports. He's the type. My friend Joe Williams is the type of friend. If we don't talk for 3 months and then we get in touch, we just pick off where we pick up where we left off, and that's the type of friend he is.
Your dad was also a central figure in your
Yeah.
journey, taking you to Ebbets Field, supporting your baseball path, and actually keeping you out of football. What kind of influence did he have on your career and character? And you mentioned your son wearing number 29. And what did you pass on from your dad to your sons?
That's another good question, Mark. The fact is that my dad got me interested in baseball. You mentioned Ebbets Field. The first game I ever saw live was at Ebbets Field. My dad took me. We lived in Manhattan at the time. We took the subway and the bus over to Ebbets Field. Saw my dad's favorite team, the Dodgers. Um, I can remember to this day walking through the tunnel and looking out on the field at the green grass, all the signs on the walls at Ebbets Fields, how bright they were. Um, in those days we had a black and white TV, so that didn't really show up on our television. The colors, the vibrant colors of a Major League Baseball field, and I can also recall, and my dad was the first one to start pitching to me to see if I could hit, and I was about 4 years old. And he'd come home from work. He was tired, but he'd still go out there. We'd go across the street to the playground, PS 57, I think it was. And he'd pitch to me and all these other kids, older kids, 12 and 13. They'd ask my dad, "How old is that kid?" And my dad would say, "Well, he's 4 years old." And they say, "He never misses the ball." And my dad, that's the only time I think in my whole life I had control over my dad. Because when I threw it and hit it, he would go chase it every time, come back, throw it again. I'd hit it, he'd go chase it. Um, it, it it's such a strong memory for me that I can still visualize it in my mind. Um, what my dad went through. My parents worked very hard to make a good living for me and my brother, and raised us. My brother, graduated from Penn State. He's been the track coach at White Plains High School for many, many years. In fact, I think this is the year he said he's going to retire. So, I just owe a debt of gratitude to my parents. I wish they were still around um, for what they did for my brother and also what they did for their grandkids. They were very instrumental um, in the early lives of my kids, influencing them and keep them on the right track as well.
So last week we had Buck Showalter on, and Buck was telling us that whenever he was deciding, what athletes that, if they were going to trade for or just
Mhm.
guys from the minors, one of the things he always looked for was the multi-sport athlete. You actually played college basketball right down the road here at Hofstra University,
Yeah.
average 18 points a game. How close were you to sticking with basketball, and what finally pushed you on the road to baseball only?
Well, even before I got to Hofstra, the baseball scouts were interested in me. When you're 15, 16 years old and you're playing in the Bronx Federation League, which was a very strong league. Here I am 16 years old, and there's guys playing in that league who've been to the minor leagues and back. They've already been released, and they're just trying to get noticed again. So I'm facing some pretty good pitchers, and I'm more than holding my own against them at 16 years old. And of course, that gets the attention of the scouts. Um, I played on a couple of good teams, East Chester AC. I played on the Red Wings. And those were some very good teams with some very good players. I think several of them eventually signed contract. They didn't all make it to the big leagues, but at least they got the opportunity to. Um, yeah, playing basketball to me, I enjoy basketball. I played at Mount Vernon High School. Mount Vernon has since become a state power. I think in my day, you could only advance as far as the county championships. But nowadays, I think they figured out how they can make more money, and you can go to the states. And Mount Vernon is in their heyday. They were traveling all over the country to play. So now they have state championships. I'm not sure where they're held, somewhere central location in the state. And I think Mount Vernon has won 9 times, and no other school has won more than three. So that's the kind of basketball power they've been. Players like Gus Williams and Ray Williams and the McCray brothers. I mean, these are all NBA players that went to Mount Vernon High School and, created a legacy there that has been unmatched in the state.
So you're a first round pick in
Mhm.
1967 in New York Mets. Granted, there's not social media. Maybe might have been the Street and Smith's baseball, but there wasn't all the hype that the first round picks get. However, first round pick of a team that hadn't done so well up until that point, always
Mhm.
lots of promise. How much pressure did you feel to live up to the expectations of being a first round pick?
Well, not much. I felt as though this was my opportunity to make a name for myself and see if I could really play. You can be the best in your hometown, or you can be the best in the county, or you could, but once you start playing against the best from around the country in the minor leaguers, you find out how good you are. Now, I can recall going down, my first spring training was in Homestead, Florida. And we were playing an inter-squad game, and I happened to hit a home run. And I was the number one pick. Clyde McCullough was one of the coaches in the Mets organization. I think he was a catcher for the Cubs back in the day. And Clyde, we're walking off the field, he puts his arm around me, and he says, "Kid, look like you have some promise. You could be in the big leagues in 3 years." And I'm thinking, "Oh, did you just see that home run? I should be there in 3 weeks." So, so anyway, it took me exactly 3 years and 2 months to get to the big leagues. So he
Wow.
knew what he was talking about.
One of the things looking back at the various scouting reports and articles about the prospects, one
Mhm.
of the things that people raved about you early on was your plate discipline and
Yeah.
just your eye at the plate. Over the course of your broadcasting career, how have you seen that evolution? And just watching the game today, and what goes through your mind when you realize, how how infrequently you struck out, how they didn't keep count of chase rates, but I would imagine you would be in like 0.0002% when you see these chase rates of these batters. What goes through
Wow.
your head?
Well, to make your point, I think in every minor league stop that I had, that I was there for a period of time, I led the league in on-base percentage. So my first year in the Florida State League, I walked 87 times. Um, the next few years, the same thing. I was walking. To me, if it was too hard to reach and hit it's going to be a ball. Why swing at it? It's hard enough to hit the strikes. You know what I mean? So why would you swing at pitches out of the strike zone? Nowadays, I think with all this launch angle stuff and the guys going for the home runs, home run hitters get paid. That's for sure. But one thing I've seen, I think it's starting to come back the other way. I think they're starting to get tired of all these strikeouts. And when I was broadcasting games, I'd see the Yankees strike out 15 times in a game and still win because they hit three home runs in a game. Well, to me, that's just like slow pitch softball. I mean, that's not hitting. There's very few guys around like Tony Gwynn or Wade Boggs or hitters like that, or Don Mattingly, guys who actually made a lot of contact and still got their hits, batting champions. Very few guys like George Brett who had power and still hit what he hit 380 one year, 390
Yeah,
one year.
yeah,
So those are the type of hitters I'd like to have been. Um, I can recall Larry Doby was my hitting coach in Montreal, and he told me, he said, "Look, you can hit 300, and you can hit 20 home runs. But if you rely on one or the other's going to suffer. So he said, that's the type of hitter you want to be. Maybe you're not going to hit 350, but if you hit 304, 305, 310, you're going to play every single day. And if you hit 20 home runs back in the day when 20 home runs meant something, um, you're going to play all the time. And that's what happened to me in Montreal. My first big year in the big leagues was there. I hit 23 home runs, hit 302, led the league in on base percentage. And what happened was I got on the radar of the Baltimore Orioles. That's what really happened. So, and eventually, they traded for me.
Well, let's go back to how you got to Montreal. So,
Uh-huh.
you take a look at that trade, and for the Mets, it was a good trade, getting
Yeah.
Rusty. But for certain, pretty much the people on this Zoom call, our generation, you were our future, kind of. You, Tim Foley, Mike Jorgensen.
Mhm.
Those were the guys we saw coming up, and we read about, and we dreamed of seeing what they would turn out to be. So the day of the trade, we were kind of heartbroken. What went through your mind being a, first round draft pick of the Met,
Mhm.
going through the farm system, being their top player every single year, and then get traded?
Well, and also toss in the fact I was playing for my hometown team. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, uh, it was a good deal for both teams, I think. First of all, Rusty is a great player, and he did some good things for the Mets. When we first got to Montreal, Rusty was a big favorite there. The fans were not very happy with this trade. They traded away their star, the Legrand Orange. But eventually they learned that every time we did win a game, now you remember the Expos were more or less an expansion team in those days, and they were looking for younger guys. They had guys who were over the hill and young guys who just haven't made their mark as of yet. They had few guys that were in the middle that carry the team. So they wanted young prospects to build upon. So they got the three of us there, and I think one thing the fans realized eventually that whenever we did win a game, one of the three of us had something to do with it. So that they started to take to us, especially in '73. I know the Mets went to the World Series that year, but the Expos hung in the race until about a week or so to go in the regular season. We hung in there, and yeah, it was kind of exciting that year. That was my best year there. And yeah, it was kind of hard. I remember the day I got traded. It was the day that of Gil Hodges' funeral, and I was told that I'd been traded. I went home. I didn't know if my parents knew as of yet. My dad was at work, but my mom was coming home from work when I got home, and I told her I got traded. And his mom's, she's crying, she's, oh, we're never going to. In those days, it wasn't like now when every game is on TV and you could see any game anywhere, anytime. Oh, we're never going to see him again. Montreal is so far away and all this sort of thing. And then my dad came home, and my dad was a little more practical. He said, this is a good thing. And my mom said, what are you talking about? We've never seen. He said he's going to get to play all the time. We're going to find out what type of ball player he is. Is he going to be an everyday player in the big leagues? My dad was very prophetic. He had some good thoughts about a lot of things, and he was right. I got to play every single day in Montreal. Eventually made a name for myself. Eventually got traded to Baltimore, which was closer to New York, and my parents could drive down to Baltimore and see me play on weekends or eventually, when they retired, they moved down there to be near their grandkids, and they went to every single home game. So they didn't get to see me play much in Little League and stuff like Pony League and American Legion because they were working so hard. The payoff was at the end when I was playing in the big leagues in Baltimore, and they were retired and they could go to every single game.
So, one of the things also about when you went to Montreal and
Mhm.
as young adults watching those games, at Jari Park and just the whole hearing the two different languages and
It was
the
cold.
and I don't even remember I don't remember his name, but the PA announcer with John, the way he pronounced John Bacabella's name and
Cabela.
things like
Yeah.
that. And the uniforms. The uniforms were cool, but they weren't so cool to you, right? You had like a bad
Ah,
reaction to those
oh
Expo
my
uniforms,
goodness.
right?
Yeah, did you start me to break out now? Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. The uniforms are actually a wool blend, and I've had very sensitive skin, and I just break out in hives. And nowadays the medications are a lot better than they were then. So they used to give me Benadryl But Benadryl, I couldn't take it until after the game because it would kind of put me to sleep. And it would relieve somewhat of the itching or whatever. But I can recall, if we're going on the road trip and getting on the bus to go to the airport, they'd have to wake me up when I got to the airport. We're getting on the plane, you got to go because that was some strong stuff. But now, there's a lot better medications for that sort of situation. And eventually, it's funny because when I got to Baltimore, and first of all, they gave me a polyester uniform, and I was the only one on the team that was wearing it, and it was a little different than the others. The color of it was a little different, but they got permission from the league for me to wear that uniform. Um, and it's funny you mentioned that because when I got traded to Baltimore, it all went away. I don't know what it was, but maybe I outgrew it or whatever, or maybe it was the pollen in the air or whatever. But it went away in Baltimore.
You also mentioned Larry Doby
Yeah.
as one of your instructors, hitting coach in Montreal. He's a Hall of Famer, but I kind of think that Larry Doby is one of those guys whose legacy is really not appreciated as much as it should be.
Hmm.
What did you learn from Larry?
Well, first of all, he was a good hitter himself. I mean, he was a Hall of Fame player. I think dedication was one because he used to take me out to the batting cage before the game every day and we'd work work and get better, improve both sides of the plate, improve. Let's get going here. And it started to pay off. All this work. We had a signal that he said to me that when the catcher would shift in, he was the first base coach as well. He said, when the catcher would shift inside, I'll call your name, but I'm only going to do it once a game because if the other team catches on, somebody's going to drill you. So I said, okay. Yeah, I said, okay, just use it when there's men on base. That could help me. So he'd be down there, and then the catcher would shift over to the inside, and he'd say, "Come on, Ken, let's go." And I knew that it's going to be a fastball inside, and I'd turn on and hit a double down the right field line. And but it was only once a game, if that, he would do it, and but only in big situations because he didn't want the opposition to catch on. He was uh, I would say he was the best hitting coach I had because all the work we did on an everyday basis. He got me to be the hitter that I became, and got me eventually traded to a really good team. That's and a couple of years ago they had a ceremony down in D.C. that he got the an award from Congress, and his son Larry Jr. invited me to the ceremony, and I hopped on the train in Baltimore, just rode down about an hour or so to DC when never been in Congress, the halls of Congress before, and sitting there as his son accepted the award for him and made a very good speech. It was a very strong speech. He appealed to the congressmen to work together, which I don't know if it fell on deaf ears or not, but what he told them was when he went outside, his mother would tell him, play nice with the other kids. And basically, that's what he told the congressman, play nice with the other kids. So I don't know how well that's working, but we still have a Congress.
Sound advice for sure. So one of the things, you get to play for Earl Weaver, and I think Earl. I mean, I know from speaking to Davy Johnson that Earl was not just the 3-run homer. Earl was he was analytic as well as anyone could be back in that day. But one of the things that was really interesting in I believe it was 75. He
My
had you
first year.
bat. Yeah, he had you as the leadoff hitter.
Yeah.
Was that surprising to you? And we've had this conversation here. Like when we take a look at Brandon Nimmo, listen, the way Lindor has adapted to that number one spot, you can't move him out. But
Hmm.
because of that, they've taken Nimmo out of that spot and they've moved him down anywhere between the 4 and 5 hole. But because of where you are in the lineup, your mentality changes. And Brandon's looking at drive balls more than work counts and get on base in that one hole. For you, what did it mean batting in the number one spot?
Well, I go to spring training in 1975, the first year with the Orioles. And I'd already had a year where I drove in 100 runs. So it surprised me. Earl Weaver calls me in the office and he says, "You're going to lead off this year." And I didn't say anything at first. Because I was dumbfounded. I said, "What? What?" I I said, "I've never done that before. I don't steal bases. That's not what I do." He says, "That's not what it's all about." Earl said, "It's about getting on base. You walk a lot. Do you walk a lot? You're going to bat first. Bobby Grich walks a lot. He's going to bat second." And Earl was a little ahead of his time because he knew what on base percentage meant. I had mentioned before my big year in Montreal, I led the league in on base percentage. Uh, and when I came to sign a new contract, it wasn't even a negotiating point. If you lead the league in on base percentage nowadays, that's worth millions of dollars. We didn't even talk about it in negotiations. It didn't mean a thing, leading the league in on base percentage. But Earl Weaver knew you get men on base, you can create his favorite thing, which was a 3-run home run. So my first time up leading off in Detroit, opening day in Detroit, about 38 degrees, it's freezing. First time up, I'm leading off. I drew a walk, go to third on a base hit. Lee May comes up, his first American League at bat. He had been traded to the Orioles over the winter, hits a 3-run homer in the upper deck in left field. Jim Palmer pitches a 3-hit shutout. We win 10-0. But I scored the first run of the season. I'm coming back to the dugout. Earl Weaver puts his finger in my chest and can't tell you what he exactly said, but he says basically what he said was, "That's what I'm talking about. Just get on base." And I walked 118 times that year. It's still the Orioles team record for a season, walks in a season. Uh, but with the emergence of Al Bunbury, who had a lot more speed than I did, Al took over the leadoff spot, and I got dropped down to third, and where I liked it a lot better, especially when Eddie Murray came around and was batting in front of him. So, and Bunbury's stealing 40 bases a year. Earl didn't believe in stealing bases. That was one thing. He only let guys steal who he knew could make it, 80% of the time. Bunbury was one, Mark Belanger was another. But Earl didn't like giving away outs. He didn't like bunting, and he didn't like getting caught stealing. He used to say, "How many guys get thrown out on a 3-run homer?" So that's basically his way of thinking. Home runs, defense, and good pitching. That's what he liked.
It's funny that 80% is, what every single analytics department says. If you're not stealing it at 80% clip,
Yeah.
you heard it. So, everyone talks about Earl, but he was ahead of the curve for sure. He knew, what percentage you needed to be successful with. And
It,
you
it's
mentioned, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I was going to say it's funny. I mentioned Al Bunbury. I just got through talking with him. We got a golf date down the road here, but uh, Al gave my grandson a lesson on stealing bases. And my grandson plays for an elite team out of Philadelphia. He's 15 years old now, elite travel team. And last year they played, 52 games? I think they won 42 of them. And he stole 29 bases. All right. Yeah, I know it's not the big leagues, but he only got caught 3 times. He's 29-3. So I said to Al, Jackson had a good year stealing bases. He's 29-3. You know what Al said? How'd he get caught 3 times? That's the type of guy Al is.
Uh,
He's kind of hard nosed. I think Earl Weaver rubbed off on him.
I think Earl rubbed off on a lot of players.
Yeah,
Those Oriole teams that you were on were loaded with talent. You're a key figure in that 83 World Series championship. What stands out most about that championship season, and what did it mean to you to finally win it after
yeah,
such a long and consistent career? Because, a lot of times guys have these great careers, but they don't get that ring. How
yeah.
important was that ring for you?
Yeah, you can ask anybody on the Cubs until recently. I think that number one, winning a world championship is the only one we won. But I was in Baltimore 10 years. And in those days, unfortunately, there were no wild cards. I wish there were because we got to the World Series twice, but we finished second 6 times. So, like you said, we had good teams. Every year was a winning season. We won more games than any other team in those 10 years. We won over 900 games in the 10 years I was with Baltimore. And we were in it every year, but there was certain years the Yankees were better. It was as simple as that. They were a little better than us. One year we won 100 games and went home. The Yankees won 103. Um, in '79, we got the World Series and we lost after being up 3 games to 1 on the Pirates. That really hurt. But when we got back there in '83, as you mentioned, we got up 3 games to 1 again, and this time against the Phillies. Now, I kind of have the feeling why we lost in '79 because everybody got too excited. We thought there's no way they're going to beat us. We got too overconfident, and Willie Stargell wouldn't let them lose. That's as simple as that. But when we got to up on the Phillies in '83, 3 games to 1, nobody said anything. No, no, we knew we had one more step to go. And what was interesting about that particular fifth game, the Phillies won the first game that year, and then we won the next four. But in the fifth game, Scott McGregor was pitching for us, and Scotty was, I thought, our best big game pitcher. I mean, we had guys like Palmer and Flanagan and Dennis Martinez, and we had some good pitchers. All these guys are big time winners. In fact, every one of them won 20 at one time or another. I think maybe Dennis didn't, but the other guys did. But anyway, Scott McGregor warmed up that day, and as he's coming in the dugout before the game, he looks up and down the dugout, and he said, "Boys, the World Series is over." And he went out there and shut the Phillies out. And it wasn't the first time he did that. We back in '79 in the playoffs, we needed one more win to go to the World Series, and we blew a game in Anaheim against the Angels. They came back and scored late and won the game. And you can imagine how quiet it was in the clubhouse after the game. I mean, if we won that game, we're going to the World Series. Well, Scott gets up in the middle of the clubhouse, and you could hear a pin drop. And he says, "Hey, everybody, I guarantee you we will win tomorrow." He was pitching the next day. He shut out the Angels 7-0. And that twice he said that, and both times he shut the opposition out. And I asked him on the golf course a few years back, I said, "Scotty, we had some great pitchers. None of them would have said that. How could you get up there and say that?" He says, "Well, first of all, you ever seen my record against the Angels?" And I said, "No, I know you're pretty good against them." He said, "I think I was like 19-4 against the Angels." I said, "Well, I guess that's why you said that." And then I said, "Well, that doesn't explain why you said that in the World Series against the Phillies." He says, "Well, I just had a really good warm up that day. I felt they couldn't beat me." And then not only couldn't they beat him, they couldn't score against him. So,
Yeah.
yeah, he was a very strong pitcher in big games.
I have two more before I turn it over to the Zoom room because they always ask better questions than I do anyway. Um,
Okay.
after retiring, you become a beloved Yankees broadcaster, and to me, I find it so interesting. It's an interesting twist for a guy with Mets and Orioles roots. How did you approach the broadcast booth, and what made that second career rewarding for you? Um, just still being in the game, or being able to talk about certain circumstances of the game. What was it about the broadcast booth that appealed to you?
Well, first of all, as a youngster, I watched a lot of baseball, especially, there were a lot of night games. And as a kid, you're inside at night. So you're watching the games. And in New York, they have all the top broadcasters. I mean, you talked about Ralph, you had Lindsey Nelson, Bob Murphy. And with the Yankees, it was Mel Allen and Red Barber. They're just great, great Hall of Fame broadcasters. And I'm watching them on a nightly basis, just watching baseball or listen to the radio when I'm driving around with my dad in the car. So, you get the feeling of the cadence of how it's supposed to work and how you're supposed to do the job. Now, how I became a broadcaster it's kind of strange. In 1983, Tony Kubek came up to me, and of course, he's a great Hall of Fame broadcaster too, mostly for his national work. But he came up to me and says, "Ken, the Blue Jays have a pretty good team this year. They were starting to come into their own." He says, "If they make the playoffs, would you be willing to come up to Canada and work on the broadcast on TV?" And I said, "Well, sure." And it's because he couldn't do the games. He was doing Blue Jay games at the time, but he was going to be working for NBC during the playoffs. So, of course, that didn't happen because we went on to win the World Series that year, and that never happened. But the next year, '84 was my last year playing, and Tony came to me again and says, "Look, There's a new network coming on in Canada. It's TSN, the sports network. It's a lot like ESPN. Would you be willing to do 20 games? Those are the ones I can't do for the Blue Jays because I will be working on those Saturdays too. And I said, sure, I'll try it. And I said, but my agent said to him, look, you got to bring this kid to spring training, show him the ropes, show him everything. And they did. They did, they held up their end. Just before the season started, a week before the season started, TSN came to me again and said, look, the Montreal Expos have signed on with our network. People up there know you. Would you like to do their games too? Instead of doing 20 games, you're going to do 80 games. You're going to do 20 Blue Jay games and 60 Montreal games in English. And I said, sure, I'll do them. And so I did both teams for a number of years. And then the Expos came to me and they said, look, we really enjoy your work. We want you to do every game. And I said, well, every game's not on TV. They said, that's right. But the games that are on TV, we want you to work on radio with Dave Van Horn, who's a Hall of Fame broadcaster. And I learned a lot from Dave. Just that's where I started getting into play-by-play because Dave would do 6 innings and I would do three. And I was in Montreal for 12 years. So people think of me, yeah, you're 25 years with the Yankees, but I was with Montreal for 12 before that. And I got compliments from Vince Scully, Jack Buck, Harry Carey about the work I was doing in Montreal. And if you get compliments from those guys, I mean, they're on top of the heap. I mean, there's nobody better than Vince Scully. I mean, and
Yep.
Harry was a hoot. He was great. And Jack Buck is another Hall of Fame broadcaster. And when they tell you that we hear you're doing a good job, just keep up the good work, it gives you incentive to keep going. Now, eventually, when we came to New York, Expos would go to New York, I noticed two gentlemen would sit in our booth and sit in the back and just listen to what we were doing. And it turned out to be Mike McCarthy and Joe Cohen, who were with the Madison Square Garden Network, who were producing the Yankee games at the time. So when my contract ran out in Montreal, my first thought, well, maybe I'll do Baltimore Oriole games because I lived in Baltimore or lived in Maryland. But that didn't work out. And the Yankees called. So I went up to New York, took the Amtrak up to New York. Um, Jim Cott and I were supposed to voice over 3 innings of the previous World Series, just voice it over. After we did 1 inning, they said, stop, you got the job. And but now you have to meet George Steinbrenner. And so I knew this is the real test because I never played for the Yankees. And we flew down to Tampa, walked into this long conference room. George was seated at the far end of the table. One thing I noticed right away, he didn't stand up when we came in. And I sat down right next to him, and the first thing he said to me was, our fans aren't going to like you. And I said, with Mr. Steinberg, with all due respect, how come? He says, I can't recall all the bad things you used to do to us. You and that Eddie Murray guy. And I said, well, Mr. Steiner, we were just doing our job. And he says, well, you did it well. In fact, too well sometimes. So, but then he started to mellow a bit. And, after a while, I think he realized he made the right call. I was there for 25 years. Um, I really enjoyed my time with the Yankees. 25 years, had a winning record every year. You mean World Series, just that sort of thing. Wherever the Yankees went, the place was packed. It was all through the Jeter years and Mariano and Bernie Williams and all those guys and Paul O'Neill and David Cohn and I mean Roger Clemens, Messina, all of them. They were a great team to cover. I enjoyed every single minute of it. I do miss the people I work with. I don't miss the job. I enjoy my grandkids more now, and I enjoy playing golf more now. And I don't miss the preparation. I don't miss the travel. I don't miss getting on the Amtrak at 5:30 in the morning in Baltimore just to head up to New York, and stay and being away from my family, being away from my wife, and just doing stuff that I can do now. In fact, I'm not in Maryland now. We're in New Jersey. We're on the Jersey Shore. So we're going back to Maryland tomorrow. So uh, I got to see my grandson play the other day. He plays for my son on that Haddonfield team. And
Wow.
like I said, they have a really good team. They're really good.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's so funny what popular culture will do to you when you describe that scene with meeting with George. All I can picture is Larry David in Seinfeld. So
Yes.
George is not going to be very happy.
Yeah, Seinfeld episode. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was
All
right
right.
out of it.
Yeah, it
Maybe.
definitely sounds like it. It's unbelievable. All right. So my last question before I turn it over to the Zoom room, looking back on your baseball life, from stickball in Mount Vernon to the World
Yeah.
Series to the broadcast booth, is there a particular moment or
Oof.
game or person that you feel truly defines your baseball journey?
Oh, I met so many people over the years. A lot of people that you admire and respect, and a lot of people you don't. Just and I think people talk about what type of player you were, and right now they're just a bunch of numbers. But the thing is that I really feel the people you meet along the way are the ones who shape your career. And whether it's a general manager like Hank Peters in Baltimore, who told me I'd never trade you, and he kept to his word. He never did. Or my teammates who I love dearly and I'm still close to, and a lot of them come to my golf tournament and play in it. We help kids who are dealing with cancer, and they come and support me. They had my back years ago, and they still do. We support each other in our causes that we have. Um, is there one person? If I would say it was my dad who he was really strong influence. He was the strong silent type. Um, my mom was the tough one. She was a little tougher. She would let you know what was on her mind. My dad was there just to talk things out and get you back on the right track if you were, if I never got in much trouble. So my brother and I just we wouldn't disrespect our parents like that. So yeah, it was him for sure. He and my mom. Every decision they made for our family, it was just the four of us, that was the right one. Whether it was moving out of the city to the suburbs or, eventually moving down to into Maryland to be near the grandkids. It's just everything they did was right on. They knew what they were doing as far as raising a family is concerned. And I'm just trying to do the same thing with my kids and grandkids too.
Yeah, I'm sure they had a big part of you being a Clemente Award winner as well. So
And
that's it's a great tribute to them. All right, so we're gonna turn it over to the Zoom room guys, and they're gonna basically you can do it by the old school, raising your hand, or technology. It looks like Mike Tuller has managed to manage the technology. He's got his hand raised. So Mike, go ahead, unmute and ask away.
Thank you, Mark. Having taken part of several questions I wanted to ask, it pays to have a backup. Ken, honor to meet you.
My pleasure, Mike.
Question, pitcher who you owned and pitcher who you hated to face. And I'm sure I took somebody's question.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know if you can say you owned a lot of them, but I think the pitcher I got the most hits off was Dennis Eckersley. And anytime you face a really good pitcher, like a Hall of Famer, or I forgot some stories. I remember hitting a home run off Eckersley. Jim Palmer needed to win his last two starts to win 20, and he was big on winning 20. So we're facing Cleveland, his next to last start, and Eckersley shutting us out 1-0. Palmer's begging for runs on the bench. And I think in the eighth inning, I lead the inning off with a home run to tie the score. It's 1-1. Well, the next hitter is Eddie Murray. And the next pitch, Eddie hit to the same spot where I hit my home run. And Eckersley took his hat off and waved at the ball as he's leaving out of the ballpark. Palmer won that game. He won his next one, and he won 20. But I think Dennis Eckersley, well over 400 against him. Yeah, I remember hitting a couple of home runs off Juan Marichal when early in my career, and he was my favorite pitcher growing up. Years later, I played in his golf tournament in Dominican Republic, and he introduced me to his wife, which was very nice of him to do. And then he comes up with this story. He says, I didn't like young kids hitting home runs off me. I was going to drill you but my wife thought you were cute, so I couldn't do it. So I would have got in trouble with her. So I looked at her and I said, "Well, thank you very much." Um, I looked it up. Faced Bob Gibson. Um, and you know what? Another story. I was doing an interleague game in St. Louis. I walked into a hotel and Bob was sitting there, introduced me to his wife. And you know how Bob, he was very cantankerous. I mean, he had a mean streak. Well, anyway, he was very pleasant, and then all of a sudden the conversation turned. He looked me right in the eye and says, "I used to have problems with you." And I said, "Bob, I never hit a home run off you." He said, "Yeah, you did in spring training." Oh, I said, "That doesn't even count." I said, "It doesn't even count." But then I went back and I looked it up. I hit 370 against Bob Gibson. So he was right. I did get my hits off and never took him deep in the regular season. Um, Pitchers I didn't like to face, Ron Guidry. It got to the point when we went to New York, I would stay with my parents. I didn't stay with the team downtown. And when Guidry was pitching, I'm leaving for the stadium. My dad would say, "You know who's pitching tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, I know." He says, "Well, what do you think you're going to do?" I said, "Well, maybe he'll walk me." So, but I finally hit a home run off Guidry. It was in the Thurman Munson game, actually, when the Yankees came back from Thurman's funeral, and Guidry pitched that night. And that was the night Bobby Mercer drove in all 5 runs and beat us 5-4. And he was one of the ones who eulogized Thurman that day. Now, it was kind of there was some concern the Yankees might not make it back to New York from Ohio because they had the funeral that day, but they did. And that was 79. We had a big lead in the division. I think we were up 8 or 9 games at that point. So as I'm walking off the field, Bobby got a walk-off hit. I'm walking off and I thought to myself, there's one game they're going to beat us. Let it be this game. That's okay. And of course, we went on to go to the World Series that year. But yeah, I remember that like it was yesterday too. Stadium was, boy, it was just different that night. Everybody was It was like very somber. And it was a hot, humid August night. It was like, a thunderstorm, like tears are going to come down out of the sky any second. And yeah, it was a hard-fought game, but the Yankees rallied through Bobby Mercer's help and won the game. Another pitcher I didn't like face, Steve Carlton. No, no, no way. I couldn't hit him. He was tough. Um, ooh, there's a couple others that were, no fun. Fergie Jenkins was 50-50. Don Sutton, when I first came to the big leagues, I couldn't touch him. But as he got older and came over the American League, then it was my turn a little bit. These are all Hall of Fame pitchers. I mean, they're when you Bert Blyleven, oh, he was no fun whatsoever. Had the best curveball I ever saw. He had 2 or 3 versions of it, and he was very. I won something against him. Won something against Guidry. Probably won something against Carlton. Um, Statistically, though, the toughest pitcher for me was Tom Seaver, and he had been a teammate of mine. I think I was 2 for 31, but one of them was a home run. And I also hit a home run off him in the All-Star game, which to me counted for like 6 or 7 hits. So, that even though I was 2 for 31 against him, those home runs, they meant a lot, especially an All-Star game home run.
So it's interesting that the guys you mentioned, the first one you mentioned, Marichal. Back in the day, a lot of guys had just the standard over the top,
Yeah,
set. But Marichal with that huge leg kick, another guy, Louis Tiant,
yeah.
just that, how do you deal with guys like that, or even Al Raboski with some of the things he would do, or Mark Vidrich? How do you maintain your concentration against guys like that?
Yeah, Louis had that whirling dervish type of motion too. He wasn't fun to hit against. First time I ever faced him, it was in spring training, and I was leading off. It was at 75. Threw the first pitch right over my head, like welcome to the American League. And yeah, I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. That wasn't the way it was going to work. But yeah, Rabowski was one of those guys. He had this act on the mound that everybody liked to beat him. If they could just somebody get it, because he's in the game in the ninth inning. You get the game winning hit off him. Yeah, that's even more satisfying. I can remember the first time we faced Bird Fidrich in Detroit. He beat us, and going through all these gyrations on the mound, talking to the ball, manicuring the mound with his hand, getting down on his hands and knees. He was just totally different than any other major league pitcher I'd ever seen. And we're yelling at him from the dugout. Wait till we get you in Baltimore. A couple of weeks, we'll see you down in Maryland. Come on, we'll see you there. And he did pitch in Maryland, and we did beat him. We beat him we beat him at Memorial Stadium. But those guys weren't fun. Like I said, it's the challenge of facing the Hall of Fame pitcher. You know, if you get a pitch to hit, you better hit it because he's not going to make that many mistakes. Especially in one at bat, you might get one decent pitch to hit, and if you don't hit it and you foul it off, then you're in deep trouble.
All right, Stevie, you got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, Ken. How are you?
All right, Steve, how are you?
I'm doing great. Honor to meet you. Growing up for me, I was born in '70, so actually until today, I had no idea you were even with the Mets. I always remembered you as an Oriole. And in fact, like my most formative times, I was in Little League. I was collecting baseball cards. I must have a dozen Ken Singleton baseball cards, except that your hair was a little higher.
Oh yeah, that was the '70s was the Afro years,
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, absolutely. My dad grew up a Dodgers fan, was
yeah.
lived in Brooklyn and went to Ebbets Field. Um, I met my wife and she ended up going to Maryland for grad school,
Mhm.
and
Good
we've
school.
lived in Maryland since '95, so I live in Gaithersburg.
All right.
Uh, my parents did not move down from New York. They actually moved from Long Island into Manhattan. Um, but anyway, so coming to the Mets, and you talked about how when you watched them, like, they weren't that good when they started. What was it for you as a young player, a hungry player, and obviously you had all this talent coming to the league. Obviously, it's exciting, but was it an oh no that you were going to the Mets? Or were you just like, I'm in the major league, so who cares?
No, I was happy to play for the Mets. By the time I got there, they were the reigning world champions.
Hmm.
And coming through their farm system, the Mets farm system was really, really good, um, especially on the pitching side. When I came through the farm system, they had pitchers like Tug McGraw, Danny Frisella, they had Jim McAndrew, they had Nolan Ryan, they had Jerry Kuzman, Jim Bibby, Danny Frisella, Gary Gentry. These are all these
Yeah.
pitchers that are in the Mets organization. Not as many position players. It was sort of like Amos Otis and myself, Tim Foley, Mike Jorgensen, and a few others. Jerry Morales made it to the big leagues. I think Juan Rios made it to the big leagues for a little while. But the Mets organization was pitching heavy, and we always seemed to win the close games. Whitey Herzog was the director of player development in those days, and he was fantastic. He taught me a lot of baseball in the instructional leagues, how to run the bases, what to think about when you're in the outfield, just all kinds of things about the game itself, the little things that, maybe the ordinary person doesn't think about when you're watching a game, but things to look for, how to know what the opposition is capable of doing, know which outfielders have the strong arms, know which ones you might be able to take an extra base on. Whitey was a great teacher, and eventually he left the Mets because they traded Nolan Ryan. He didn't particularly like that deal, and he just left the organization. But I was fortunate enough to have him, guys like him and Larry Doby, who I had mentioned, Ralph Kiner, all these instructors on my way up, and they were all very good. Um, just I have a lot of respect for all of them, and a lot of admiration for what they did to help me get to the big leagues.
That's great. And one other aside, my son, when he was 6 years old, this was about, ooh, gosh, 16 years ago,
Mhm.
I signed him up for the Major League Baseball Players Association alumni clinic at Nationals Park. And so this was early on
Uh-huh.
with Nationals Park. And your good friend Al Bumbry instructed him there and really had great interactions with him. And so please pass on that compliment. He was
Al's
really
a good
terrific with
teacher.
the
He
kids.
gives hitting lessons in the Baltimore area, and every once in a while when we're on the golf course riding in the cart together, he'll tell me about a kid he's had he thinks it can really hit, and he says, he says actually he says I didn't have to help this kid that much. He's pretty good to begin with, so he fine tunes them, and then there's other kids that he says he's got no chance, but well, I'll do the best I can with him, and he's giving the hitting lesson, so I guess it pays well.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Interesting you mentioned Whitey Herzog, and that's one of those what ifs. What if Whitey Herzog had remained with the Mets organization
Yeah.
as opposed to the Cardinals? Where would they have gone? And maybe, Whitey probably would have gotten the managerial job
Yes.
over Yogi, and we could have had a nice little run there. But interesting. Whitey's just his loss just was it last year, I guess. I think just
Yeah.
a little over a year ago. Great baseball mind for sure.
Yes,
Uh,
definitely.
yeah, Sal, I see you have your hand raised. Kenny, just so you know, Sal is our resident memorabilia collector.
Okay.
He'll usually pull out a yearbook or a card or something. So we always interested to see what he pulls out, no matter who our guest is. What do you got for us today, Sal?
Well, the first thing is this really annoys Steve when I do this, but I do have
Uh,
Only if
you,
it's like the Yankees or Braves.
Uh,
the tricolor hats,
well,
they were okay. I just thought me personally, I thought they were kind of clownish, but the thing is that that's what you wore every single day. Um, and of course now they're in the Nationals, and now I'm not so sure they're going to get an expansion team. My feeling is that Nashville's going to get a team. I think Portland, Oregon, and I saw the other day where Orlando has come up with like $1 billion.
dollars, yeah.
Yeah, we all know it's about the money, right? Whoever comes up with the most money, you're going to get an expansion team. And the baseball is looking to expand by two more, so two more teams.
Well, the other thing Rosie said, I do have a card. This is your rookie.
That's
Oh
one of my
Look,
favorites.
10 years old.
But this
Well, I
is
was closer to 10 than I am now, for sure. So
this is the
Wait,
version. This is the
what
OP.
is that? Oh, Peachy. I was wondering because in the middle they had
It's
right,
printed
right.
in Canada.
Yeah.
But then,
wow.
did you have to learn like French? Did you really embrace the language?
Yeah, I learned enough to get gasoline, be able to order a drink and maybe get in a little trouble. Those were my single days. So yeah. I kind of embraced it some. I don't remember. I know more Italian and Spanish now than I do French. So I just haven't heard it in a long time.
I will say this though. Molson or Labatt's is definitely a step up from Schaefer and Reingold. No question about it.
Schaefer was the first beer I ever saw on TV.
What are your feelings on poutine?
You know what? I heard it's a lot of cholesterol, so I don't deal with that stuff.
Got to tell you, Ken, you were no question, one of the smartest broadcasters I ever got to listen to.
Thank you.
You explain things in such a common folk way that anybody could understand it. And I appreciated that a lot. I mean, it was the Yankees, but I still listened to you.
Well, I think one thing I learned when you're doing a broadcast, you got to realize there's all types of fans out there. There's fans who know a lot about the game. There's fans that know some about the game, and there might be some neophytes out there that don't know anything about it. So you got to make it clear, concise as to what you're talking about. And when it comes to something maybe a little complicated, trying to make it a little less complicated so everybody can enjoy it. One thing I will tell you, Sal, is that I wanted the fans who are watching the game to enjoy the game as much as I did working the game. And I love my job. it was fun. I couldn't play anymore, so I might as well talk about it. And get paid for it. That was pretty cool, and get to travel throughout the major leagues still. Um, of course, after a while, how many times you want to go to Detroit or Cleveland? That's you get to the point where you say, no, there's other things to do. I don't have to do this anymore. They talked me into coming back once. It's not going to happen again. So, eventually, I called it quits.
Yeah, I spent a month in Cleveland one day.
Yeah.
Uh,
Just it's tremendous to talk to you. Do you ever do any of the memorabilia circuit?
yeah, sometimes I do. And I think the most recent one I did was over the winter. Actually, we spend the winters in Florida, and I flew up to Maryland to do one in Westminster, Maryland, do a card show. And Rick Dempsey was there. Some of the other Orioles were there, and it was good to see Rick again. I'll see him in a couple of weeks. He's going to come to my golf tournament. Last year he won, so he's got to come back. So, yeah, I do them. So I've been to a few in New York. I've been mostly in the Maryland area, but in New York too. I'll go up to New York and do it.
Well, hopefully I'll get you to sign one of my cards.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure.
Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate it.
Ken, thanks so much for your time tonight. Like I said, huge thrill for me. You've always been, very gracious with your time with me, but thrilled to have you on this. Like I said, number 29 was my first number, and then kind of morphed into number 11 for Mark Messier. Kind of weird, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
like, but definitely one of my favorite players growing up. And yes, even as a Met fan, always appreciated listening to you on the Yes Network as well. So thanks so much for your time tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it, talking baseball. I'll do that anytime you want, for sure.
Yeah. Everyone that says that knows that I'm going to take them back up on it.
That's
So,
okay. If I'm around a laptop or my computer at home, I'll do it.
all right, Kenny, have a great night.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.